has felt resentful from time to time.
Yeah, I think it's something that everybody deals with at some point in any relationship.
And what was interesting is that we were talking and before we filmed and about resentment and the fact that there are probably plenty of people who feel resentful towards someone or their spouse and they don't even know why. They just feel frustration.
Right. Or they're having these behaviors coming out that's messing up their relationship. And if they were to think about it, it would be rooted in resentment. But sometimes it's hard to even know that you're resentful because sometimes you're just doing what's expected, right? You had an example that was really good that we talked about earlier.
Right. So if we kind of imagine an example where you are the wife, your husband gets a higher paying job that you know on an intellectual level is really good for your family. So you convince yourself that this is a good idea. I just need to be okay with this. I need to support my husband. And so you all move across the country for this opportunity. But you shoved your emotions down and you didn't really consider how you really felt about it. So later, you're arguing with your husband about something really ridiculous, and all of a sudden you say, oh, it's okay. You always get your way no matter what. And he is just like blindsided because he's like, where is that coming from? Like, what?
Right.
What? And it might even be that that's the first moment that you realize something is wrong here.
Right. So in that example, if you had given up, friends, maybe you were plugged into the community, maybe the kids were connected with like some really cool friends and sports and stuff, and so you're embodying all of this stuff that you're leaving behind, and you're not acknowledging that at all. You're just kind of pushing for, and it's not a bad thing. It's
Right.
not like your husband did that to you intentionally or hurt you. It's not like you were purposely shoving down these emotions and things. That's just kind of how you coped. And unfortunately, the result was resentment because you were never able to acknowledge and deal with those feelings.
Right, because the synonym, like we've talked about, is the synonym of resentment is dissatisfaction. So at the root of that wife feeling frustration towards her husband, it's coming from this place where she's not 100% satisfied with this move because she's had to grieve the loss of several things that she used to have, and now she's trying to come to terms with what that is going to look like. Mm-hmm. So she has a decision to make in that moment. She can either make that statement of, well, you always get your way, and she can shut down and not go any further, which is only going to distance herself from her partner who's not sure what's going on because, according to him, she was fine with this move. And if he picks up on that, he might even say that, right? Like, mm-hmm. Well, you wrote what? Like, you were okay with this. Why are you acting like you're not okay with this anymore?
Right. And then she could respond back and say, well, I'm not, and then that creates this whole big drama where, man, it would be so great if either the wife or the husband in that moment could notice that little phrase of you always get what you want, stop the argument right there and say, hold on, let's figure this out. Like, where is this coming from?
Right. And that's where, like we've talked about in another video, if one or both of you feels like you're emotionally flooded, then maybe you need to take a time out, take about 20 minutes to just calm down and come back together. And he can hopefully say, why did you make that comment? Why did you say I always get what I want? Mm-hmm. And then maybe with a little bit of thought, she's able to articulate in a healthy way that, when we moved, I understood rationally that this was the best idea for our family. But now that we've moved, there's all these emotions that I have, mm-hmm. and I miss a lot of things, and I don't really know how to feel about it, but I still know that it was the right thing to do, and I feel a lot of things right now.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, I think from the husband's position in that argument, one of the worst things to do is to be scared and like avoid pressing into that discomfort. I think, I know at times in the past I would have felt like, oh, I can't approach that with her. I just need to shut that down, because what if she says, oh, we have to move back? I think the reality is a lot of times you're not necessarily going to follow through with that fear, but you need to acknowledge it, you need to address it, you need to process it so that you can move on where you are. And I think that a lot of times, this is just one example, but resentments can build over anything. Like, if you have an argument, if something doesn't go your way, if you are dissatisfied about something that has happened and it's not resolved, if it's shoved down, that can crop up later as resentment, and it could really come up as anything.
Right. So maybe what that wife needs to say when she's talking to her husband and explaining how she feels is like, I just have so many emotions about this move and all of these new changes, and I just really need for you to understand that I'm having a hard time right now. I didn't even realize I was having such a hard time, but I am. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, what's happening is you're increasing that emotional intimacy, because he probably didn't realize before then that you were having a hard time, because maybe you're used to just holding everybody else up, and it's not fair to make your spouse be a mind reader, to expect that, well, you should know I feel this way. No, nobody is entitled to know how you feel unless you tell them, because no one can guess at how we feel. Mm-hmm. We can only articulate that. And I think on the flip side of resentment is the simple fact that we have to be careful about what we're dissatisfied about, because some things are just not worth it. So some things are going to be something you're dissatisfied with that is just a minor annoyance with your partner. I mean, honestly, I try to tell myself, will this matter to me in a year from now? And if the answer is no, then I need to work on getting over whatever it is, maybe even by myself. But if it's something that would bother me a year from now, well then yeah, I probably need to say something.
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes if I get frustrated with something that you do, a lot of times if I just say it, it makes me feel better. And like, not in like a mean way or a harsh way. I think a lot of times we kind of try to make a joke out of it. Like, I don't know, almost like overreacting with like a dramatic way.
Like driving?
Yeah, like driving.
Yeah.
That's a good example.
I'm a very, very anxious rider. Yeah. And so sometimes sometimes he does make fun of me, but it's something that I can understand. I don't feel like he's in a loving way. And it kind of helps to diffuse things, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something that you will do, right? It's a good
strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
It's sort of, he like pretends to be me when we're driving. And that actually does help sometimes. Obviously not if I'm frustrated. But when he does that, it's funny sometimes, and it helps me to see kind of what it must be like if I were you. Mm-hmm. And I pity you.
Yeah.
Really do sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's just kind of knowing each other well, kind of knowing how to navigate certain issues and how to interject humor. And sometimes if you interject humor and you know it's not going over well, just like letting it go, moving on.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
So you can probably hear our dogs barking in the background.
They do that a lot.
Yeah.
Especially if the mailman comes by.
Yeah. So one of the other things that we wanted to talk about was the other thing. Hold on, I'm gonna start over because I'm gonna cut that out.
Cut it all. What is the other thing you're gonna talk about?
Oh, I forgot. Hold on. Oh, okay. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about with this topic of resentment is just that it really, really, really builds intimacy when you can, in a healthy way, learn to talk to your partner about how you're feeling, to resolve issues in a healthy way, because then you're not piling on stacks and stacks of things over time, where it gets to a point that there's so many things you're resentful for. There's so many things you're frustrated about that you don't even know where to start. One of the things that I really appreciate about you is that I feel like we're able to realize that we are resentful most of the time. And when we get that way, we immediately have a conversation, and it just clears everything out.
Mm-hmm.
So that I'm not carrying anything against you, and in fact I just feel closer to you because I know that no matter what I feel, even if you don't understand it, you are going to hear me out, and you're going to try to work with me on things, because sometimes anxiety does get in the way for me, and he doesn't understand what it's like to feel anxious as a passenger, for example. And when we were first married, he would say things that would really drive me crazy and make me resentful, like, well, you shouldn't be nervous. Why are you nervous? There's no reason to be nervous. And I would say, well, yeah, I know. And I really wish that I didn't feel this way,
right.
But that's not helping, right?
Yeah. Well, and I will say, I think that we've been married for many years, so as resentments start to build, and you can flesh them out, the first time it's probably going to be kind of difficult to kind of muck your way through that, but when you've done it time after time after time, like you said, you've really lubricated that chute, so you're able to kind of get rid of those resentments much easier,
right,
over the course of time when you've done it several times, which, I mean, every time you do that, it builds intimacy. Every time you're able to get rid of those resentments, you build deeper connections, you build deeper intimacy, you have those feelings of closeness. And so, it's really not good when you've been married for a while and you haven't fleshed out those resentments. You haven't had that break. Because
then it can get to the point of you might not even want to be around that person, because if you're carrying so much dissatisfaction, resentment, unmet expectations around, then you have this burden inside of you, and it gets in the way. It creates this barrier between you and your spouse. Like, what is in between? What is the wall in between both of you? Like, you have to think about what that is. And if there are a lot of things, that's where, honestly, a good marriage therapist is really helpful, because they can actually help you sort of unravel and understand what the main issues are, so that you can start to put back your relationship together. And that can be a lot of work, but any relationship, even a good one, is work, right?
Well, and it's interesting that you brought that up. I think visiting a good marriage therapist is, not too unsimilar to going to a doctor. Like, if you have this emotional pain that's built up in this wall, you can go in with, an axe and a shovel and just try to hack your way at it. But if you go to a good therapist, they're going to be more like using a scalpel to kind of precisely hit some of those points and take them out without causing the extra damage that could happen if you try to tackle stuff.
Right. And the biggest thing is just making sure that you both are committed to doing the work to repair whatever resentment has been building up, even if it's been for years. That's not something that one person can resolve. It has to, because it's a two-sided coin, right? There's another person involved. So the only way that you can repair that is if both of you do the really hard work of learning how to connect and learning how to forgive and move on from things. So that's why understanding resentment is so important, and not just ignoring things and pushing things under the rug, because that will work in the short term, because maybe you're just like, I don't even want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. But then it keeps coming up, right? Or similar things keep coming up, and you get more and more frustrated that your partner keeps doing this or they keep doing that. But at the same time, you never let them know what your expectation was for their behavior or whatever it was. So is it really fair that you keep getting frustrated for them doing something, but they didn't know, and you certainly didn't tell them, nor did you tell them that you were upset with them about it anyway? So how are they supposed to behave any differently unless they know? And then when you finally explode and you're like, oh my gosh, you always do this. You did it then, you did it then, you did it then they just feel blindsided and crazy defensive because there was no connection to even discuss this when it started. So really, you have to think about being really careful when you talk about this, because if it's been building up over time, it's not fair that you've been holding on to that against your partner without them knowing, because again, they're not mind readers. So, we hope that this was helpful, and that if you notice yourself feeling resentful, ask yourself, will this matter in a year from now? And if it will matter to you, then really take a second, take a few minutes to sit with it, understand where it's really coming from. What is beyond the frustration? What is beyond the anger? There's something else there. There's some unmet expectation, some unmet need that's happening. And you just need to be able to figure out how to articulate that in a way that your partner can hear you, so that you can build connection and you can let go of that resentment, because no one wants to live like that.